Hey, I'm Jill Griffin. I'm your host, The Career Refresh. Today, we are exploring what makes or breaks leaders in their first 90 days. And it's perfect timing because there are 90 days left in the year. And I know that one doesn't exactly equal the other, but if you are thinking about the next 90 days as we close out the calendar year, or you're a leader in your first 90 days, this is a great episode for you to lock in on. My guests today are Neill Marshall and Kirk Mosley, and they are respected voices in healthcare leadership and executive search within the healthcare space. Neill is an executive search veteran. He has over 30 years experience. He has landed over 600 senior level assignments and secured them for individuals. He also serves as the board chair of Health Search Partners. Kurt is the firm's associate practice leader. He is a nationally recognized expert whose writings and insights have appeared in USA Today, U.S. News and World Report, and Modern Healthcare. Today, they co-authored a book called The First 90 Days, From Résumé to Results, and it's a framework that has been endorsed by hospital associations. It's been featured in Modern Healthcare, and I believe that even if you're not in healthcare, this is an opportunity for you to be thinking about your first 90 days. And even if you're in your job, there's still a time to reset and think through, what do I want for the next 90 days? There is insights here for everyone. So in this episode, they are sharing stories, proven lessons, tactical takeaways, and things that you can build on as a new leader, or you might be new to your role, you might be new to the company. Where are you going to build impact and how you're going to take that impact from day one? All right. So let's do it. Let's dig in. Gentlemen, it's really good to have you here. Thank you for making the time. So I want to get right into the first 90 days from resume to results. And I understand that this framework has been a tool that you've been using really successfully. What I want to know is why? What's the origin story?
Yeah. So we kind of stumbled into it. I was interviewing a hospital CEO who was telling us about a tactic that he had used in the first 90 days of every assignment.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, that is really significant. And I've interviewed 10,000 hospital executives, and I've never heard anybody do anything like this. So I started questioning why more people that I've interviewed have never mentioned a 90-day plan, right? So Kurt and I started doing research. And what we also found is that how many of the careers can be broken
Oh, tell
in
us
that
more about
first
that.
90 days, right?
Tell us more about that.
Sure. Well, we interviewed a CEO who, in the first 90 days, he fired a subordinate and did very little research behind it,
Oh, dear.
and discovered that they were one of the most popular people in the organization,
Hmm.
and it brought this person down.
Hmm.
They
Yeah.
were gone.
Right, right. I can see that. All right. So you had a conversation, you stumbled upon it,
Mhm.
and then what made you turn it into a series?
Um, well, again, I thought it was very significant, and I talked to Kurt about it, and Kurt was like, "Well, let's write this one up." And so I went back and talked to the guy and interviewed him, and we got all the nuances of it and wrote it up in an article,
Mm.
and published it, and it got a lot of attention, and we decided, hey, this is a great way to help our community, which are hospital executives.
Right, right. All right. So you mentioned that one that was the origin story, but okay, you've heard so many stories. So tell our listeners and our viewers what were some of the most unconventional things that leaders tried that actually worked?
So
Well,
let me do this. Let me tell you my one or two top
Sure.
ones, right?
And then
And
I'd love
then
to hear from
Kurt,
Kurt.
then I know Kurt has got a couple. My favorite is the first one, right? Richard Parks, CEO. He started at Lubbock Methodist, and he said, Neil, he said, whenever I go to a new place, my wife stays home to sell the house, and I move into the hospital. And I said, yeah, Richard, everybody works hard in their first 90 days. And he said, no, I move into the hospital. All hospitals that are big have places where the residents sleep. He said, I move into the residence dorm. And I do that for the first 90 days. And I said, well, what did you come up with? What? And he said, my first night, slept, woke up the next day, and there are all these residents around. And you know how old people do. I asked them how they slept, right? And one of them said, I slept like crap. These mattresses are horrible. And he said, I can fix that. And he called his VP of facilities and he said, we're replacing all of the mattresses in the residence lounge today. Let's get 5 pickup trucks. We're going to Costco and buying 30 mattresses. And he said the last day he stayed there, he was there 10 years. He said on my last day, people were still bringing up that story.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Okay. The other one, Shane Cerrone, who was CEO at Beaumont Health up in Michigan. I'm always looking for the Holy Grail. Shane, tell me the one that. What is the bit? He said, Neill, it's not one thing. It was a series of 100 things that we did, little bitty things that end up being significant.
Mm. Okay. Kurt, you have some.
Yeah, well, a couple that I always like to mention. Dan Castillo, he was at County USC Medical Center in LA, and his first day he showed up at around 1 a.m. Instead of doing rounds at the same day, when his first day he walks around with everybody and they're waiting for you up front in the foyer of the hospital, and he did these rounds during night shifts where people rarely saw the CEO at all. And people got to know him. And he said, basically, his message was, I care about the night shift as well as do the day shift when things happen. And he also said, I really found out, spending a lot of time late night in the emergency department, he found out how the hospital truly ran. And he developed some systems that really needed to be corrected right away. And it really drove his targeted change. He said, he came in and said, what do I want to be the first 90 days? And he said, I want to make change. I don't want to go too quick, but I want to make change. And many of the changes, really, he found out during that, doing those night shifts that he came in on. He'd come in, like I said, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. for the first 2 weeks. Another gentleman that I talk about, Jim Decker, he wrote a book called Transforming the Heart of Leadership. And he said, I really developed this 25-50-25 rule. And I said, okay, what's that? Some new concept. And he said, well, when he first started and he was going to the regional blood center in Knoxville, he was the CEO there. And he said, the 25% of the people there are like you right away. They're on your side. He goes, 50% are in the middle. And I needed to interact with them and, introduce myself and say to myself, what symbolic action am I going to take? How I'll be visible in a meaningful way. Then he said the 25%, the bottom 25%, you're really not going to convince. But he said, you still work on them. You're nice to them. He said, but not waste your time. He said, but concentrate on the 25 and the 50%. And he still gets you through the first 90 days. And I also like Jim. He told me, he said, Kurt, on the side, he said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I said, I've heard that before. And I said, what'd you do? And he said, well, the first week I wanted to make an impression. So Dunkin' Donuts had just come into town. So he went and bought Dunkin' Donuts for the whole doctor's lounge. Well, little did he know that they've been using the same in-town bakery for 20 years. And there was an uproar on the first day. And he said, so I changed it. He goes, it was a crisis, but I made it work in my favor.
I love it. So when you think across, you've all these individual stories, there probably are themes and patterns that are showing up again and again. And while we do have those in healthcare, and that is your prime area, also thinking about these same patterns or themes have to apply across other industries too. What are some of those patterns and themes that you're seeing that leaders can really step back and then deploy within their organization to create positive change?
Well, I think most importantly is when they start establishing trust in not just members in the hospital, but people in the community. I think that's very important. Harvey McKay wrote a book. It's a Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And it was basically reaching out to people before you needed their support, community leaders, attending conventions, community events, social media, sometimes, depending on the city or the town, going to church and introducing yourself. And stay in touch constantly. I mean, promote yourself, market yourself at the start. And then really listen before you take actions. There's a lot of pressure on a CEO, Jill, the first 90 days to do something. But in a lot of cases, a general theme that ran through some of the CEOs said it's better to do nothing when you're unsure of what's going on. John Wooden, who was national legend coach of UCLA basketball, he had a quote that says, "Be quick, but don't hurry." And what that meant was understand before you make a move. You got to understand they expect things in the first 90 days. The board does, the hospital does, the patients do, the doctors do. But make sure before you make that first move, people said the general theme was, I fully understood the situation before I acted on anything. So, and I think those are keys. And then another one I think is people either get this or don't get it, Jill, but is understanding the culture of the hospital and that first theme. Because people always say new CEOs rarely stumble because their lack of ability, because they got hired because of their ability, but they stumble because they misread the culture at the very start. And I always like to say,
get a read on the culture, because not everyone wants to be honest right away with the CEO, right? It can put you in good graces. It can put you in jeopardy.
Yeah, it's a good question, but the people that we did the symbolic actions that, like Neill talked about, like sleeping in the hospital, replacing the mattresses. Neill had a story with one CEO they worked with that picked up trash in the garbage in the parking lot before he came in, and that everybody came up to him and said, "Well, it's a new concept," and he got to know them because he got to know them on a straight basis, if you will. And then some of the CEOs, scrub up, or they work with the janitorial services, so they basically take a step back and say, "I want to see what you do," and people are more open to you for that. And I always say culture is really the multiplier. Ignore it, you get even the best strategy will fail, because if you don't understand that culture, it'll hit you 10 times down the road. So, culture is an invisible structure, as you said. It's really hard to figure out. But just being honest with people and saying, "I need your help at the start. Tell me what the general theme of the hospital is." And one CEO even said, "Listen, I'm replacing another CEO, but tell me if you could talk to him now, tell me a couple things he could have done differently to be more successful." And they told him, and then from those responses, he understood what the culture of the hospital was.
He's also building credibility and trust.
Yeah. Yes.
To them. When you think through some of those themes, so we're talking about finding out about the culture, asking questions, right? And both the stories you both shared, there was a little bit of mishap, right? We bought the wrong donuts and we fired somebody who was obviously a very liked employee without any context. Are there other mistakes that you see commonly pop up that, there would be a smarter move to make instead that you would recommend within the first 90 days?
Yeah, I think thinking that you have all the answers, when the reality is a lot of times your employees have the answers if you will just allow them to do them and implement them.
Okay. And Kurt,
my father used to say this all the time, and people always have to have me repeat the quote, but he said, "You can't talk your way out of something you behaved yourself into." And I learned it my whole life, but my last 30 years in healthcare, I really understood it. Many CEOs come in and they issue memos and put posters up or do themes, but the reality is it's not really what you do, or not what you say, it's what you do. So your behavior has to track, and I think it's people are looking for your behavior. If you come in and say, "I want to talk to everybody," and you ignore everybody. So again, it's really, I think, no PR campaign can fix that. If you don't behave the way that if you're talking the talk, the behavior has to correlate with that. And I think that's really important. And you have to own your behavior. If you goof up, you have to listen more than other people talk. And sometimes you have to make visible changes, but sometimes, especially at the start, do that over time. So you're not going in, we're doing 10 things this week to change everything. So again, a lot of times people come in and say, I want to meet everybody, and they don't. So again, people look at your behavior, not necessarily what you say. So you can't talk your way out of something you behave yourself into. So
Right, right. Okay. Um, I want to go back to the point that we were talking about a little bit around culture and knowing that culture can be tricky, right? One, getting a read on the culture is one thing. Um, how would you suggest a leader comes in and they're inheriting a culture, but they also need to signal change, especially, there's a reason why there's a new CEO, and it's not always because the previous CEO retired, right? So how do you recommend that leaders sort of navigate those two sides, respecting the culture that's there, but also signaling that there needs to be change?
Yeah. So one of the people we interviewed, Jay Ferguson, in order to try and understand the culture, interviewed his management team, and his management team was about 175 people, and he interviewed all of them in the first 90 days. A lot of people do that, but the one thing that I liked is he asked each one of them, if we're successful in this first year, what has changed? Give me one thing that has changed. And then he was able to get all of those and bring those all up and figure out what were the common themes around that change that people wanted to see. And I think that was an important consideration. The other one is when you ask about signaling, it goes back to this is literally the first boss I ever had. I worked right out of college for a wholesale distributor of plumbing supplies, and they fired our CEO. And we had a new CEO, and all of us were, apprehensive about having a new CEO. And we literally were looking out the window when he drove in the first day, and we watched him get out in the parking lot, and he didn't come in. He walked around and picked up the garbage in the parking lot, threw it away, never said a word, came in, introduced himself, and we were off to the races. But I can guarantee there were a bunch of young, really aggressive people that worked in that organization, and I can guarantee he never saw another piece of garbage in that parking lot because we would get there before him and make sure.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that he did, as we loved the guy, we would be in a bullpen answering inside sales calls, right? And there was a phone ringing one time, and he walked by and he reached over and picked it up. He said, "Grover Martin, Ferguson Enterprises, how can I help you?" Took the order, handed it to one of us, never said a word, and walked out. From then on, if he was walking by and the phone was ringing, people would jump over desks to answer the phone to make sure that he didn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's reminding me of very early on in my career. I started at Atlantic Records, top record label.
Yeah.
Very similar thing where we called it the pit. You were in the pit, you were on overflow. The phone was never to go to voicemail. And I will remember the day that Jane Fonda called and it went to voicemail. And she, not her admin, she personally called and it went to voicemail. And oh Lord. But yes, that whole idea of being president, not letting your customers wait and getting a human, especially, as more and more technology takes over the work that we're doing. There's a place for technology. There's also a place for real relationships and not letting the bots and the IVRs and all of that be answering your calls. So I can totally agree with that. Were you going to say something, Kurt?
No, I was just saying, Jill, you talked about culture, and it is invisible, in some cases. But one CE told me, he said, when you're trying to find out about culture, don't take one opinion, because he asked the board what the culture of the hospital was, and they told him. He asked the doctors in their own private meeting what the culture was. He asked the nursing staff what the culture was, and there were 3 different cultures.
Sure.
So again, he had to put it together and say, what is the general theme here? So don't just take one word for it. So
right. Yeah, it also reminds me that I believe that there's culture and there's climate, and if your culture is strong, you can withstand climate changes. marketplace indications. We were talking about the changes that are going to happen within the United States for anybody listening within healthcare. Those are all climate-based changes. And if your culture is strong, you can weather that, assuming you're both ready and prepared. So when you start to think about visibility and trust, I want to come back and talk a little bit about relationships, but talk about if you were going to speak to someone who is in that C-suite hoping to get to this role, or maybe the step below the C-suite hoping to get into the C-suite role. What would you be telling them to focus on as far as visibility and trust and how important that is within, if they're taking on an assignment or within their first 90 days?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly important, and you be as visible as you possibly can. I remember interviewing a VP who said one of the things that she did is she would actually go work in each of her departments, and not as a VP. She put on the uniform of the department, and one of our people did it also, Derek Ziegler out in Memphis. He works in each of his departments, but he doesn't work as a VP. He picks up a broom and he says, give me the hardest job, give me the dirtiest, give me the worst job you can give me. And he does it without complaint. And he does, and he does it for them. He serves them and does it for them. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that is being really, really visible. Mm-hmm. Right. Being with your people.
And I think that I don't mean to be repetitive, but words don't really build trust when you're trying to ascend to a different level. Behavior does. Make yourself be visible. Take on that extra assignment. People always say, I want more and want more and want more, but be that utility, baseball player that will play all fields and learn all fields, just to help the team. Say, basically, I'm here to be a team player, whatever I can do to help at this very moment. Mm. So like I said, they look at the behavior, and that builds trust. It's not what you say, it's how you behave. And I think, trust doesn't really hinge on being perfect, but it really hinges on being accountable. Mm-hmm. And, during that time, if there are mistakes, account for them, own up to them. So
I can kind of hear some of our listeners and viewers wondering, like, I always say leadership is a lifestyle choice. And if you are thinking about that visibility and you are in the up and coming, how much is enough? Meaning, what would you say to those people who are thinking, yes, I want to be visible, but I also have values that my family is important, that I'm working a certain amount of time, my own health, my own well-being, getting enough sleep, mental health, all of that. How would you speak to someone who is coming up and, hoping to get to this level? What would you say to them and how to make that visibility thing right-sized?
Well, I think that I asked the CEO one time, and you hear CEOs say, listen, 100% of my time is devoted to my job. And he said, that's not the way to succeed. He said, 85, 90% of your time should be devoted to your job. The other 10% should be your family and your personal interests, or you're going to burn out, and people will understand that. So again, understanding it's not being there 100% of the time. It's taking time for yourself to learn, be a part, work with your outside interests and work with your family. So,
Neill, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah. It has gotten, technology has allowed us to improve certain things. And we can use technology in certain circumstances. I'll give you an example. In our business, I used to spend 8 hours a day on the telephone. I don't call anybody anymore. I either we communicate shortly via email, or we're doing this. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that it's so much more valuable and builds such a better relationship doing this versus being on the telephone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if someone, again, was thinking through how do they navigate the expectations of visibility versus like the other extreme, which would be like presenteeism, what advice would you give them for how to structure that for themselves?
define presenteeism. I'm not sure I understand it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so all of your Gen Z and millennial friends will tell you about this. Presenteeism is, I mean, I had to do it depending on where you sat. The CEO was still there. He couldn't leave. 6, 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, couldn't leave, couldn't leave. Don't be the first one to the elevator. You need to be seen. You need to be showing that you're working, even if your work's done. There's a tone, and depending on some cultures that have like you need to be here. I know it gets talked about around return to office. If I'm being asked to come into return to office and work, yet I'm coming in and nobody else is there, so all I am all day, then I'm not actually interacting with people and I'm on a video screen all day. Did I need to be here? Right? That's presenteeism. Like how I 100% believe we need to be meeting people physically in some capacity, different roles, different jobs, right? If you're an engineer, maybe you don't have to do that as much because you're doing independent contributor work. But how are we balancing that we have a $30 billion asset class called commercial real estate and we need to fill this building versus do we really need people in that? And that's what we're talking about presenteeism and visibility. And these are real questions that workers are asking. They want to do a good job, but does it require what does visibility mean? And I would just love, as you two seasoned executives have done this, what does it mean in your world?
That's, you know what, Jill, that's so complex.
That's why
Jill,
we're here. Yeah.
And I don't know that there's an answer that there's an easy answer to it, right? Here's what I would focus on. Rather than focus on the big, I would focus on the few. So make sure that you're focused on the level above you, building the relationship with your boss and your boss's boss if you can, right? And really focus on that relationship. And that one doesn't need to be a 12-hour a day relationship, but really focus on those important relationships. And then remember that, our careers are not 10 years. They're not 20 years. They may start being 40 years. And so it's doing a little bit every single day. You don't have to do all 14 hours in one day.
Right. I love it. I think it's a really strong answer. And I agree with you. It's not a one size fits all. There's too many nuances to it. But again, what we're seeing is the bottom rung of the career ladder right now is broken. So if we're not in a position where we can give guidance and help and give some wisdom on those that are coming up, we're not going to have bench strength. We're not going to have seasoned executives continuing to fill up if we're not helping them get structured and get the understanding of different cultures and then picking and choosing which culture, which vibe kind of works for them. Yeah, I appreciate that answer.
On that same point, one of our next series is going to be on mentoring, right? Mm-hmm. Because we want to explore, do you need mentoring today? I mean, the reality is when we all were coming up, we learned from our mentors. Right? If we wanted to find out how to do something, you called a mentor and you asked them. Well, today, if I ask my son, hey, do you want me to teach you how to do this? He says, no, I'll learn it on YouTube. And I started thinking about, well, then does that mean that the young people don't need mentors anymore? And what we've discovered is, yeah, you do, because a mentor not only teaches you how to do something, but they can also give you a job and they can also recommend you for another job.
Yeah.
And that's something that you can then continue on over. You should be able to be with those mentors for 20 or 30 years. And if you do that, the things that you will get from building those relationships and having those mentors is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think, to your point, you can watch a training video, whether it's employer sponsored or whether it's YouTube, but it's not going to teach you nuance. How much did you learn because you were in earshot proximity to a conversation that maybe you followed up with later and said, can you give me some context for that? What was going on? What was the challenge? And then you're learning because of that level of nuance, which again, you're not going to get in a training video in that way. So you mentioned one of your the one on mentorship. You've built this really strong platform of this 90-day series. Tell us some of the other topic areas of what you're going to be exploring in the future.
Right. The mentorship series, and then we've just released our first of, I think it's 7 or 8 articles on the search committee or panel interview.
Oh,
so in the hospital arena and in not-for-profits, CEOs typically have to go before a panel of board members called a search committee. And I've sat through hundreds of them, and it's a very different animal in the interview. So we put together a 6-part series, and we'll be releasing it over the next, I don't know, month and a half or 2 months, talking about what it is, how to do it, what are the do's, what are the big horrible train wrecks we've seen, and then how to best attack it and get the job.
I instantly heard. I was just going to touch on that on the panel interview. I recently was talking to someone who had a panel interview of 6 people, and because it was during COVID, they were all wearing masks.
Horrible.
It was they were literally scarred and had PTSD. They were like, this is the worst experience ever. Kirk, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that with AI today, with Zoom, I mean, just think if we would all invested in Zoom 15 years ago, COVID actually accelerated, but that's the way we do business. But this new series that Neill was talking about, there's a difference between owning the room on a video conference and owning the room in person.
Absolutely.
I mean, and that's one of the things that they talk about when you get in a room. It's body language you don't see on a video interview. You don't see how your head's placed, if you shake, touch your hair. I mean, these are so many things that good qualified candidates don't get that job because they can't go in and own that room. And that's what this is. We're trying to design it to help. So
yeah, no, I love it. Love it. Another question I had for you around relationships. I know in looking through some of your stuff, you talk about building relationships in those first 90 days outside the organization. Give us a little context for that as to the balance, and also why. Why are we building externally before internally, or are we?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's just a hospital is who we work with, main part of our job we work with. It's part of the community. And, usually it's either the hospital or the school board in small towns and also medium towns that really are the employers of the community. So everybody in that community you have to live with. So you want to establish those relationships outside of what the hospital boundaries are, because everybody in that community, sadly, is going to be your patient one day or another. So that's what I think is very important, especially attending, people always say, do I go to church? Not a church. I don't want to offend anybody. Community events, be a part of that, 10K walks, whatever, but the successful CEOs come to that community and become part of that community, and so does their family. And it's really important, to have their family to become part of that community, whether it's the spouse and whether the children in school being a part of this high school swim team. And I think those are I think are key points to assimilate and be part of that community. And be accepted during that first 90 days, because that's, we found it's really a make or break period. It's like I said, it's your behavior to those first 90 days, you're on stage. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's opening night at the Met, so it's like, you gotta be on stage. You gotta be wearing your best outfit. So.
I love it. Well, gentlemen, thank you. This was really, really informative. I think people can take away, regardless of what industry they work in. And some of the things that I heard as key takeaways is avoid moving too fast, right? Making sure that you're really listening, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in proportion. Also respecting the culture before you go and try to change it. Using symbolic actions to find ways to build trust quickly. I love the idea of the mindset around the 25-50-25 rule to understand your stakeholders and know where to put your efforts. And then the last where we're really touching on is prioritizing visibility and those relationships both internally and externally for day one. So I think all of those points again, regardless of what industry you work in and whatever title you're at, are all things that anybody can deploy. And I appreciate that. Thank you all for being here. As always, if you have questions, you can email them to hello@jillgriffincoaching.com. We will get them answered. We will bring Neill and Kurt back if we have questions for them. And be intentional and always, always, always be kind. Thanks for being here. I'm Jill Griffin, your host of the Career Refresh podcast. My mission is to make workplaces more successful for everyone. So if you have ideas for topics or future guests, please email us at hello@jillgriffincoaching.com. Until next time, embrace possibility, be generous, intentional, and kind.